Olene, the heartbeat of humanity is calling you. Also the heartbeat of the earth, your divine mother. I've ever wondered what makes your heart beat? What makes it continue to beat? Just imagine an old-fashioned phonograph. How does it work? You place the vinyl disc on the photograph, right? Turn it on. You place the needle, the stylus, in the groove. The groove is in the heart. So your heart is actually an instrument of sound constructed by cosmic powers. And in the heart, in the groove of the heart, there's a bead that floats. Bead of sound that you can't hear. The name for the heart in Sanskrit, in Tantric cosmology, is anahata, which means the unstruck sound, yet it is a sound. So the bead floats in your heart, and it runs around and around the grooves of the old vinyl disc. And that's what actually keeps you alive and keeps your heart beating. And she runs that mechanism. So every time your heart beats, she gives you the heartbeat. And her heart beats with you. And all that is truly mysterious. And it is also mysteriously true. Everything is material. Even love. Even love is material. So what about love? That's a subject to consider when the subject of heartbeats comes into view, isn't it? It's fair to say that when you see someone you love, someone you come to love, your heart beats in a special way, doesn't it? Your heart beats for that person, boy or girl, man or woman, and your heart beats with them, synchronizes with their heartbeat, and that's love. Now, it's fair to say as well that I talk a lot, don't I? And I talk publicly and privately. When I talk about publicly, often, is Planetary Tantra. I've said from the beginning, it's entirely free. It's the system of autogenic feedback between each human animal and the source of life, the mother planet. Now, there are many technicalities in Planetary Tantra, and I don't talk about all those technicalities publicly. I don't need to explain to anyone what I do, but just as an act of spectacular generosity, I'll let you know. I only talk to the in-group about certain technicalities of Planetary Tantra because it would be wasteful and reckless and unwise to talk about them openly. You need to be associated with a circle of trustworthy people who know that technique in order to discuss it in more intimate details. That's why I hold some of it back, and I discuss it with members of the school, with the insiders of Planetary Tantra, called Shaktas. Now, the extent, the amplitude, the depth of the intel that I have is considerable. And it's almost not fair for me to just put it out publicly. I have a responsibility with certain elements of that Gnostic intel to teach people how to handle it. It's high power intel. So I'm not just going to give it out to anybody unless I know that I can take some responsibility in showing them how to handle it, you see. So there's no end to my talking, is there? It just goes on and on and on. And you may wonder sometimes, I don't know, I'm just guessing for a friend, that you may wonder about, me personally. Because the way I come across to you here is actually in a transpersonal medium, transpersonal genre, transpersonal style of delivery. So you may wonder about me, maybe not. But if you do, one of the things that might have crossed your mind is love. And you may wonder, who do I love? Or, better said, keeping with the heartbeat theme, have I ever fallen in love? Have you ever wondered that? Has John Lash ever fallen in love? Well, whether you want to know or not, and whether you're ready or not, I'm here to answer that question, and the answer is a resounding yes. I did fall in love once, and the operative word is once. And I can assure you, whoever you are, that the old saying, the old songline is true to the core. The first cut is the deepest. So yeah, I did fall in love once. It happened on a cold January day in New York City in 1967. I fell in love with a 14-year-old girl, and her name was Michele Kerouac. And after that, I never fell in love again. Not to say that I haven't loved again. Not to say that I don't love now. There are men and women in the world today that I love deeply, but I haven't fallen in love with them. I've made the choice to love them. There's a saying in Planetary Tantra. It's a beautiful, beautiful saying. Love is a force of discovery. Now, how would I comment on that saying if you haven't heard me use it before? What it means is that when you find anything to love in life, when you encounter anything that you come to love, such as an animal, a man or a woman, a place, a tree, when you come to that experience, you have been led there by the force of love already. Love is a force of discovery. It's a cosmic power. It wends through the entire universe. And it leads you to those things that you come to love, to those things and those persons and animals. It leads you to them. And so when it's real love, and you see them for the first time in your life, by chance or whatever, you see that person you come to love in front of you, the force of love has already brought them to you. And it's as if you loved them before you ever met them. That's how it is. That's how it works. And that is most certainly how it feels. I venture to say that the way it happened to me is the way it happens to everyone. So the first moment that my eyes looked upon Jan, I already loved her due to the force of discovery that brought us together. And at that moment, she loved me as well. And there's another factor that came into play in my case, and that's the factor of beauty. Now, you may know by now how important beauty is to me. Important is a cheap word. Essential. And I have a voracious appetite for beauty. And when I saw Michele Kerouac in the hallway of that rundown tenement building at 144 Avenue B in New York City, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen and would ever see. And I have never known a woman more beautiful than Jan. But what do I mean by beauty? Do I mean cosmetic beauty? Do I mean beauty by the popular standard, whoever is dictating those standards? Well, I mean natural beauty. Goddess-given beauty, like the beauty of a waterfall, of a willow tree in the rain, beauty of a wild orchid on the lawn, that kind of beauty, but in feminine form, in the guise of a 14-year-old girl. And I was what? 21 at the time. So there were about 6 or 7 years. She was born in 1952, January 16th, 1952. And there was Jan, and what can I say? That kind of beauty I've never seen again. There is no woman in the world beautiful enough for me, to be brutally honest with you. That was the first cut. First time and only time I ever fell in love. Now, what can I say about Jan's beauty? Well, it was something intimate to me, something special for me. It was something the universe prepared for me alone to receive. At the same time, if you want to put it in popular terms, she was a stunner. Beauty of Michele Kerouac was literally traffic stopping. I can remember incidents when I would be with her on the street somewhere, particularly in New Mexico, I remember. We'd be in Santa Fe walking down the street. And you would hear the screech of tires, I kid you not. And often it was a carload of Latinos or pachuchos, locals of the area. Jan spoke fluent Spanish, by the way. and they would slam on the brakes and create a traffic jam when they saw her on the street. So she had a beauty on a standard that attracted that kind of attention. And tragically, as I've said, Jan had the curse of beauty. I call it the curse of beauty because it brought to her a lot of attention that she didn't want and most certainly didn't need. And she didn't always handle it well, unfortunately. You see, Jan had her beauty, and she also had her character. But she didn't have the character of a woman who knew how to exploit her beauty, and she had no desire to do so. She was too naive and innocent to be able to traffic on her beauty. Do you see that? Her character was not that of a woman who could do anything like that. So what was her character? She was a magical child. She had an IQ of 187, and that's close to 40 points above me. She was so smart. She was so intelligent that, again, she didn't even know where to go with her intelligence. And she was mischievous and playful in such a wonderful way. She had an impish smile, twinkle in her eyes, and a mischievous curl in her lips when she smiled. And many, many things amused her. Everything amused her. The whole tragedy, the complete scale of stupidity of the human condition just amused her. And I amused her too. Jan never made fun of me, but she used to humor me. Do you know what it is to humor someone that you love? She humored me. And she knew that there were things about me that were not normal. And she knew that people couldn't handle me. And she found that also quite amusing. In fact, Jan had a term she used to describe me. We didn't socialize very much. Talking now about, the 60s. The end of the 60s we met, and then into the 70s. Well, the hippie movement was still pretty big. The last wave of the psychedelic youth generation was subsiding. We never belonged to that. Jan hated hippies. We never associated with hippies. But of course, that was the cycle. That was the cycle of youth, the revolution of youth, which was a spectacular event of that moment. And we were in it, but we were not part of it. We never wanted to be. So we didn't socialize very much. We were raw and faithless. And we kept to ourselves. We had a world on our own. But occasionally, of course, we would socialize. We would fall into one scene or another. And Jan, who was super observant, often noticed that people were uncomfortable around me. She never explained anything. She never made any excuses for me. Hell no. But she used to smile in that wry, mischievous way she had. And she would comment sometimes to people. And she would say, nah, don't mind him. He's like an astringent. Like witch hazel. So Jan told people that being around me was like having witch hazel slapped on your face. And she found that so amusing, and she loved to watch that. But basically, we didn't engage with anyone. We didn't like to engage. We dissociated ourselves. And we lived a solitary and lonely life together. And in that life, Jan was my medicine. Her beauty was my medicine. It was a balm to me for the pain that I carried, pain that I could never understand. It took me years to know the root and source of my pain. But when I looked at Jan, when I heard her laugh, when I watched her making bread, when I watched her in the garden, squeezing her bare feet into the mud as she watered the tomatoes. She loved gardening. She talked to vegetables. I would just look at her. I would just gaze at her. And it was so comforting to me. So I drank the beauty of this young woman. It was my medicine. Now, I also found that medicine with other women. In fact, the company of women, and only women, was my consolation in medicine in life for many, many years. But with Jan, it was that unique medicine that I couldn't find anywhere else, that helped me, nurtured me, so that I could withstand the intensity of what I was suffering until I came through and broke through, and I knew what that suffering was about. It's about the tragedy of the mother. It's about the root of all addiction. That is addiction to the pain of not being seen. But I saw Jan, and Jan saw me. So our love was an exclusive affair, standing aside from the world. We were misfits and renegades, never really found our place, even in the social order of our peers at that time, or any other time. Now I have my peers, now that Jan's gone, and I have them because I create them. You know, the French writer, probably don't know, Stendhal, he was a romantic writer of the 19th century. He wrote a lot about romantic love. It's quite instructive to read what he said. And one thing he said was, love does not seek equals, it creates them. And that's what I do now with my love. And I do love women today, very, very deeply. Certain women in my life, and men as well. But I don't love anyone like I love Michele Kerouac. I never will, and I don't even want to. I've learned so many things from love over the years. Perhaps love is the supreme teacher in a way. And what could I tell you about what I've learned? Well, a couple of things maybe. Just what immediately comes to mind. Just a couple of things. How about this? Separation is an illusion, but loss is real. So it could be said, speaking in common language, that I lost Jan. She died, so the saying goes. She died when she was only 44, in June of 1996. But did I lose her? Well, in a way I really did, but in another way I didn't. what love has taught me, among other things, is that you can never really lose anything that you truly love. It stays with you all your life, and it forms and shapes your life. There are a couple of lines of poetry that come from a British poet, English poet. I think his name was George Herbert, and he belonged to a group of so-called metaphysical poets, which included John Donne, D-O-N-N-E, who wrote some remarkable poems about love. And this line goes like this: "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." And that's kind of a truism. You might find it inside a card with roses on the front that you send to someone, maybe to console them at the loss of a loved one. But I go you one better on that. I've revised those lines, and they go like this: "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have lost at all." So loss, which is a risk of love, is actually essential to the richness of love. Now, there's a formula among those I call kalikas. Those are warriors in the line of beauty, not the line of duty. Warriors for the goddess, warriors for the anthropos. That line concerns the triple whammy, the triple wounding that can occur in the course of life: loss, abandonment, and betrayal. These are events that can occur. And when you experience all three of these at once, that's called the triple whammy. Now, Jan suffered that loss. She suffered abandonment, and she suffered betrayal, but never from me. The abandonment in particular came through her family history, because she was the daughter of a famous American writer, an icon, a cult leader, Jack Kerouac, known as the King of the Beats, and he's a personality in the literary world of the United States and indeed globally, who was associated with a movement called the Beat Generation. It emerged in the USA following the Second World War. The most famous novel of Jack Kerouac is On the Road, which he was writing in 1952, at the time that Jan was born. And he abandoned her, and more or less refused even to recognize that he had a daughter, or that she was his daughter, until a certain moment in life when I decided that wasn't going to fly. So I took Jan. We were living in the Lower East Side in New York City, and I went to Lowell, Massachusetts with her, and I took her to her father. And I think it was only the second or third time in her life that she'd ever seen him. So I confronted her father with his daughter. And she wrote about that meeting in her book, Baby Driver. Well, that meeting was significant perhaps, but it didn't really heal the wound of abandonment. So Jan suffered from that abandonment. You know, in the early part of our lives together, our life together, she didn't even want to be known as Jan Kerouac. She never introduced herself that way. She wanted to be known as Jan Lash. So there was a big problem there, father-daughter problem. And he betrayed her. by denying that she was his daughter. And I never forgave him for that. I'm not the forgiving type anyway. And I hold in contempt the people who are in his cult and who worship him as a great literary figure of the 20th century, which he may well be. But as a man, something less. It is better to have loved and lost than never to have lost at all. That's something that I've learned from love. And what is the second thing, I might say? Well, I'm reminded of an incident that happened once when I was in a place called Marion, Marion, in Massachusetts. And I was associated with a group of people there and an institute. And I met a woman there once at a big gathering, big social gathering on a Friday night before a seminar that I gave. And she was a lovely woman. She was really beautiful. Reminded me of Lauren Bacall. That kind of beauty. Classy woman. And she wore a Stetson, which was really classy too. Woman style Stetson hat. She had a scarf. She had flair. This woman had style. She was super rich. She came from New York City. And she came over to converse with me. And she was really honest with me. And she said, well, I know what you're saying about Christianity. And, I know that a lot of the beliefs in it are probably wrong and maybe even unhealthy. I was speaking, of course, as a Gnostic, presenting my critique of Christian faith in that circle at that time. She said, I know that the things that are wrong about it, as you describe them, they're probably really wrong. But I need it. I need that faith. And I said, oh, really? Why is that? And she said, well, I lost the one love of my life a few years back, and I'm alone now. And I really count on being able to see him again. And in this faith of Christianity, it's widely assumed, somehow, that if we hold the faith, then we will encounter the ones we love after death. And that's really the main reason why I'm still a Christian. What a remarkable thing to say. I mean, she was so candid with me in that moment, in that gathering. So how did I respond? Well, I said, there are other ways to have that assurance, better ways. But of course, it was a passing conversation in a social setting, and it was no place or occasion for me to go into the subject any deeper than that. But let's say I go into it deeper right now with you. Let's see if I can tell you something about what I learned from love that is truly transcendental. Although Jan Kerouac died, according to the ordinary way of stating things, in 1996, I've actually seen her 3 times since then. And I've seen her in physical form just as alive as any of you are today. Now, the occasion and the circumstances in which this meeting occurred, these 3 meetings, are exact and extraordinary. I'll describe just one of them. When I was living in Andalusia, in a white village, looking out to the Straits of Gibraltar and the mountains of Africa, I had a little 2-story house in town, and the bedroom was downstairs. So one day, I think it was in the spring, I was sleeping down there, and I woke up when I was sleeping. So I woke up in a lucid dream, and I immediately realized that I was in a lucid dream, and it was as if I were awake, but I knew that I was dreaming. So I woke up in bed, and I looked around, and the instant that I recognized that I was having a lucid dream, I got quite excited, as happens, and I said, well, what am I going to do now? Because in a lucid dream, you can do anything you like, you see. So I got up, and I went up the stairway to the 2nd floor to go out on the balcony and look out across the valley below, down to the coastline, across the Straits of Gibraltar to the mountains of Africa, as I often did, and that is one hell of a view. And when I stepped out on the patio of the house, I didn't see that view. No. There was another view. There was another landscape right there in front of me. Now, I knew that I was having a lucid dream, so in a way I wasn't surprised, but you can't help but be surprised in a lucid dream, right? So I was startled, but I was sober and rational even, and I looked at this other landscape right off the balcony. I could step off the balcony into this other landscape, which was a scene in an area, in a setting that resembled Maine, where Jan and I had been together on some occasions. And it resembled certain places in the coast of Maine where you have a grassy area leading to ledges that face upon the ocean, and you look out across the water to islands, and you look out into the distance beyond the coastline. So it was a setting on the coastline of Maine. And there were some people there having kind of a barbecue. So there were tables set, there were awnings over the tables, and some people were mingling and chatting, and there was Jan Kerouac standing there a little bit offside from the rest of the gathering. And she turned and she looked at me. And I stepped out into that scene, and I went to talk to her. And she was alive. She was as real as any physical person that you see in the course of your day. But of course, it was not this physical or material world in which that meeting happened. So where did that meeting happen? Where do you think that meeting happened? It didn't happen in another dimension, and it didn't happen in some imaginary setting that was purely the product of my mind. It happened in a real world setting. Now, due to previous experiences I've had over the years, I recognized the setting. I've been there before, and I knew at that moment that in that lucid dream, I had been transported to Andromeda. Now, Andromeda is the galaxy that is closest to ours, and it is the partner or counterpart to the galaxy in which we live. And on Andromeda, among the 4 spiral arms of that galaxy, tucked inside one of those arms, called the Cyrene limb, there's a planetary system which is the mirror world to this system you and I inhabit. So there is a mirror Earth. There is another Earth that is the mirror to this Earth and everything that happens here. But it's not a mirror like the one you see in the bathroom. It's a mirror of non-similarity. So all the events that occur on Andromeda do not mirror exactly the appearances on Earth, but they take another form. They look different, but they are the exact mirrored appearances. This is something that I've learned over many years about the Earth world in M31, the Andromeda Galaxy, which, by the way, is the most distant object visible to the naked eye. You can see it unaided by a telescope. Now you may wonder why that world is there and how it comes to be there. Well, that brings up a tremendous subject. And lately I've been inclined to talk to you about this subject, the control group. Whenever you have an experiment, there needs to be a control group in order to know if the experiment works. So if the experiment consists of subjecting 1,000 subjects to something, for instance, to an experimental vaccine, then half of those subjects don't take the vaccine. They're in the control group. And there's no way to know if the experiment with the subjects who do take it is effective unless you measure and evaluate the results against the control group. Now, I've often said that here on Earth, you and I are living in a divine experiment. The control group for that experiment is in the Andromeda Galaxy. And there you find all those who have appeared to have died. And some of them, not all, it gets complicated, some of them look exactly like they do here. So Jen looked exactly like she does here, except of course she was 9 times larger, and so was I, because there's a 9-degree magnification on the Andromeda mirroring planet. So there we were, and we had an encounter. And I knew, as I knew the other 2 times I saw her under different circumstances, that she was not just alive, she was more than alive. And that she lives now. And so although I lost her in a way, I never did, you see. And you never can. That's how love works. It's a transcendental mystery. And everything is material. So, I wish I could sing for you. And if I could, I would sing those lines. Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is, she never left me. Enough said. And I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.